Good morning, 222. It's great to be with you today. Over the last few weeks, we've explored the subacrostic of Joshua under that trait of commitment. You know, manhood, we define in the Crusader program, manhood in action. A biblical man is one of commitment, honor, responsibility, initiative, service, and truth. And as a result of that, we've been going through the subacrostics under commitment. And the first one was judiciously chooses, then finishes the course, as modeled by Joshua, son of Nun. And then the second one was obedient to Christ, as modeled by Gideon. The third one was strong and courageous, as modeled by Caleb. And today we're going to begin to delve into the fourth trait in that group, which is habits of a champion. We're going to have multiple videos on habits of a champion because frankly it has many facets. And it's important that we understand right from the get-go that habits are critical to the way we live. When the pressure's on, we always revert to our habits, the place that we feel most comfortable in. For years, the cliche was popular that said that practice makes perfect. That isn't true. Practice makes habits. Perfect practice makes perfect. And it is an issue that we need to begin to work on. We've got to work on our character. And there are ways to do that, but we have to make sure that we're working to perfect it, not simply to make it habitized. Therefore, we're going to make our habits align with our value systems, the way we want to live. You know, John Wooden, probably the greatest basketball coach at the collegiate level that America ever had, said, "Be more concerned with your character than with your reputation, because your character is what you really are. Your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are." Now, character is something, as I said, that you have to practice at to get better. And the danger is that, as Woody Hayes once said, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. And we want to make sure that we build great habits and that we're constantly getting better. So we're going to start with the fear of the Lord as a habit of a champion. And in Proverbs 1:7, it says this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." It seems to me that if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, then we all need to start there. Pastor Jim defines wisdom as seeing things as they really are, seeing their true purpose, and then making those things our real purpose. Now, to be more specific about that, that means to say that what we need to do is see things the way Jesus sees them, to see the way God sees them, and then we need to make, as Jesus said, he said, "My will is to do," they asked him what the works were, and he said, "My will is to do the will of the Father. My works are to do the will of the Father." So what he was trying to do is make sure that his life and his example followed that of God. And where do we find that? Well, we find it obviously in the Scriptures. Now, when we talk about fear of the Lord, a lot of people disagree about precisely what that means. So I'm going to start with the Holman Bible Dictionary definition of that. And it says, "The fear of God is not to be understood as the dread that comes out of fear of punishment, but as the reverential regard and awe that comes out of recognition and submission to the divine." Now, I want to break that down a little bit because they use a couple of words that we don't use a lot in our society. Number one, awe, which is a mixed feeling of reverence, fear, and wonder. Wonder because of Creator God, reverence to that Creator, and fear, a concern for what might happen if I live outside of His will. Reverence is defined as a deep respect, love, and awe. So there are a lot of things that happen in here when we talk about the fear of the Lord. Reverence and awe both have a component of just good old-fashioned fear. Now, a lot of people I know really, they don't teach that. They don't believe in that. I do. I believe that we need a healthy fear of the Lord, a realization that we are subject to God's discipline. Why? Because He loves us, not because He wants to punish us, because He hates us. He loves us, and He wants our lives to be safe and secure, and He wants to make sure that we're doing the right thing. This fear that I'm referring to is not one of abject terror, because I believe that God is going to kick my teeth in. This is one to recognize that, it's just like, and I'm going to talk about this later in this lesson, but it's just like my dad. I'll tell you what, when I was a young man, there was some fear there. I didn't want to get spanked, and we're going to talk about that. So most of us would rather not think of God as a disciplinarian, right? But Hebrews 12, 7 through 10 makes this truth very clear. It starts this way. It says, "It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline?" Now, in the old days, nobody even had to ask about that. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? All fathers discipline their kids, assuming they were in the home. But then the feminization of America started, and it was cruel to discipline your son. So what they did was they said, don't discipline your son. It's all about love. Let him do whatever he wants to do. And this led to unruly, out of control children who are now raising unruly children. Think Berkeley riots in the past 3 months. If you hate your son, listen to me, if you hate your son, you won't discipline him. If you love your son, you will discipline him. And you will do that regardless of what anyone else thinks. Now, by discipline, I'm not talking about busting him in the jaw. I'm talking about controlling his behavior and letting him know that there are places beyond which is unacceptable for him to go as he grows up, or her, by the way. You must be strong and courageous to discipline your son in this day and age. You have to be obedient to Christ, but you have to be strong and courageous. It's not easy to do. So to go on with that verse, it says, "But if you are without discipline, of which we have all become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us." That's partly why we are here, men, is to discipline our children. "And we respected them. Shall we not much more rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live?" That's God. "For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them." That is our earthly fathers. "But he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share" what? His holiness. That's the whole point of discipline. Discipline really comes from the root word to teach, and discipline is all about teaching us to be conformed more and more and more to his holiness. So to understand the fear of God, we need to understand more about God himself. There's a tension in two of God's attributes. One is that God is transcendent. That is, he is all-powerful and all-knowing. All-powerful, all-knowing. He's also immanent, which means that he's right around us. He's loving and he's caring and our friend. And those two things don't seem to make much sense, do they? All-powerful, all-knowing, and yet he's our friend. He cares for us. He loves us. God can do anything he wishes to do, yet he loves and cares for us so much that he uses his power only in a loving way. Now, I think that's really important to understand when we talk about fear of the Lord. Because when God disciplines, when God uses his power, it is because he loves us, not because he hates us. It is because he wants us to grow more and more like him. When we're out of his will, we should expect discipline. For pity's sake, sure we should. I know if he hates divorce, and by the way, he does, that I know he expects me to stay married. He doesn't want us to stay married, by the way, and be miserable, but he doesn't want us to look elsewhere either. He wants us to stay married and give up our selfish ways so that we can have the kind of marriage that he planned for us. It's worth working on. Anything good is worth fighting for, and that includes your marriage. We know pornography violates God's best for our lives. How do we know this? Well, Jesus said, "But I say to you that everyone looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Well, the point of looking at pornography is to get aroused, to be sexually excited, right? With someone else other than your wife. So that's what makes it a sin. It's a healthy fear for the Lord that can keep us from getting outside the will of God for our lives. And that keeps us safe. and in fellowship with God. 1 Corinthians 6:18 gives us a great admonition. It says, flee immorality. That's it. Honestly, that's my life verse. I've kicked it around a lot of different things, but flee immorality. That's what I want to do. It says every other sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. Flee. Don't think about it. Flee. Don't rationalize it. Flee. That doesn't mean walk away. It means runs. It means get going. Run away from danger, which is obviously immorality. But fear alone is not a sustaining motivation to follow God with our whole hearts. We can fear him. We can fear him to the point, though, however, that it's only fear and we don't grow closer to him. As I grew older, I respected and revered my father so much that I didn't want to bring him shame or disgrace him. I wanted to please him. I feel that way about my heavenly Father now. I'm aware that he could spank me. Yes, he could. But my biggest fear is that I will embarrass God, that I will let him down. And it's not because I fear him in some sort of abject terror sense. It's because I want to please him. Now, some of you didn't have a great dad like mine, but God is calling to be your father. He wants to be your dad. He wants to love you. He wants to care for you. And it will lead to a point where you will say, as I say, I serve God out of appreciation, not out of obligation. I'm not obligated to follow God. I want to follow God because of what he's done for me and because of who I know he is. Having said that, a healthy fear of the Lord is helpful to me. Sometimes people just don't want to see God as a God of justice. Yet we need to, because as Pastor Jim has also said, God's grace doesn't mean that God is blind. God's grace doesn't mean that God is blind. Men, we are so fortunate to have a God who uses his power because he loves us and wants to conform us to his character. Because he's conceited? No, because his character is the best way to live. So, there are some takeaways this week. Number one, we need to form good habits before they are called upon in tough circumstances. You better have that life insurance policy before you need it. Really hard to get it afterwards. And that's the same thing that's true of habits. It really is. Number two, the fear of the Lord is the first habit that we need to develop. Now, whether you think of that as reverence and respect and awe, that's fine. For me, I find it helpful to recognize that when I'm outside the will of God, he's going to discipline me. And it said, and the scriptures go on to say, all discipline for the moment seems sorrowful. Nobody likes discipline. So why walk into where God has to discipline you because you choose to live in a way that is unacceptable, that is immoral? Number three, fear of the Lord includes awe, which is a mixed feeling of reverence, fear, and wonder. Number four, as a person matures in Christ, he relies more on respect for God, which is to follow him, respecting him, which is to honor, to esteem him. Number five, ultimately, we want to reach a point we love God so much that we won't embarrass him or let him down because we love him because he first loved us. Hey, be intentional this week. Honor Jesus. See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.